Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to talk to you about how you can protect your plants from frost, because at the moment we're in a bit of a cold spell here in the UK, and not long ago, maybe a week ago, it was about over 20 degrees just about every day of the week. And that's why you need to protect your plants, because when it's consistently cold the plants acclimatise and they harden off, but then when it's warm and then cold they get a bit scared and confused, and it can really damage your plants. So today I'm going to split the video into sections. I'm going to have why you need to protect your plants, so basically what happens in the plant when they do get too cold, plants you need to protect, and how you can protect those plants. Before this video gets started, please go down below, hit the subscribe button. So first of all, let's speak about what happens to plants when they wilt. And what happens to plants is a bit of a chemical reaction really, because when it gets cold, plants basically make their own antifreeze. So a bit like how windscreen wash that can work in cold weather in cars works. What happens in plants is in their cells, the cytoplasm, the concentration of the salts and the sugars changes. So when it's warmer, they start to adapt to have slightly less concentrated, so it's more towards water in their cells. But when it gets colder, they start to have more salts and things, because if you think about salty water and the sea doesn't freeze as easily as a freshwater source does. So that's basically what happens in the cell when it gets cold. The concentration of the salts and sugars alters to try and stop it from freezing, or when it's hot, to try and make sure they can get as much water in as possible. So what does this actually mean? So it's all good knowing what happens to plants when they get cold, but what does it mean to the plants themselves? So for example, in an ideal world, you'd want the weather to be consistently getting warmer through spring, no freak frosts or anything like that. So it's all a perfect graph and no ups and downs or anything like that. But in reality, it's not like that. What really happens is sometimes there may be warm weather and then all of a sudden it might crash down, a bit like what's happened here recently. So what we really need to do is realise that when plants start to adapt to a set temperature, so when we had a few days of warm weather last week, well up until yesterday for me, so what we need to realise is that when plants experience warmer weather, so like the ones in my garden did last week, they start to decrease the concentration of these salts and sugars in their cells. And what this probably did to my plants today, when it's gotten colder, is that all of a sudden these plants are panicking because they haven't had time to acclimatise again into the cold weather. It's less gradual. So what you need to do is you need to protect them so that they still think it's warm weather, and then slowly acclimatise them back into cold weather if it's autumn, or just for the small cold period if it's this time of year. And also some plants' frost protection is by in autumn dying down and putting all of their energy down below in tubers, a bit like dahlias, or maybe a bit like lupins. Lupins tend to die back in my garden in autumn, and that's a frost protection method basically of the plant, to store all of its energy underground where there's less likely to be a hard frost, to make sure that they can grow back strong the next year. But sometimes when dahlias start to grow, like they have in my garden over the last week, we'll need to mulch them, or we'll need to put something like fleece, which I'll talk about after, over the top of them. So that is why we need to protect our plants, and what happens to plants when they do get cold. What plants do we actually need to protect then? So the ones that we need to protect are not the ones that claim to be hardy, because these can normally withstand temperatures from -5 to -10 in the UK anyway, and many of them even lower than that. But the ones we need to focus on are the ones that are called half hardy or not hardy at all basically. So those ones that in my garden I tend to focus on are the dahlias, lupins, potatoes, runner beans, tomatoes, cucurbits, things like that. Just things that are from, or most of these plants that tend to be from places that are a bit warmer, so maybe even from the south of the UK, or maybe they're from a different country altogether. So we need to focus on the ones that aren't used to or aren't designed basically for this cold temperature. And the other type of plant that tends to be quite fragile is obviously young seedlings as well, which is why I tend to keep them in a greenhouse or in a cloche or in any type of greenhouse or a cold frame when it's cold, or basically just most of spring, because it lets them have a fairly consistent growing environment to grow up in until they're ready to be planted out, and then before they get planted out I harden them off. And to harden seedlings off, what you do is you put them outside every day in the daytime, and they'll get used to the wind blowing through the leaves, and they'll get used to all of the cold and everything like that. And then you bring them in overnight when the temperatures might be a bit colder. You bring them back into the greenhouse or windowsill or wherever you want to put them. And then you do this every day, and then after normally I do it for about a week, maybe 5 days. And then once you've done it for that long, they should be fairly acclimatised, and when you put them outside, there won't be too much transplant shock. So the next part of this video is going to be how you cover the plants or how you protect them from the cold. And this is the main part of the video I'm sure you've all been waiting for. And I'm not just going to say go out and buy loads of fleece, because that's a bit not very cost efficient. And if you've realised it's going to be cold tonight or overnight or whatever, and you don't have enough time to go out, or maybe you don't have a local garden centre, then this video is perfect for you, because I'm going to speak about not only the things you can buy, but also things that you can't buy that can just be found around the house or garden or shed or whatever. And obviously, ideally, you would have somewhere like a greenhouse, windowsill or cloche or cold frame that's maybe heated or just doesn't really get much frost, to put your plants in overnight when it's going to be cold. But obviously this relies on two things. One, that you've actually got somewhere like that to put your plants, and two, that your plants are motile, so that they're in maybe a container or something like that, which a lot of plants aren't, that you need to protect. So this is also going to be everything. So basically, if you've got nothing like a greenhouse, if you've got no fleece or anything like that, this part is going to teach you everything that you need to know about protecting your plants on a low budget and without anything like greenhouses. So the first way of covering your plants from cold that I'm going to talk about is Enviromesh, which is what's down here. And Enviromesh I use for just about everything. I use it all year round, and I think it's really good. I'm not sponsored or anything like that, I just really like the product. And I will be linking things that I mentioned that you can buy down in the description here, but don't feel like you have to buy anything, because you don't. So this Enviromesh, it's a very fine garden mesh or netting, and it can protect from cabbage white butterflies in the summer, and then in winter when it's cold, it protects a bit like fleece. It doesn't protect down to the same temperatures as fleece, but it does keep the worst of the cold off from my experience. And I used this last year when there was a freak frost in May, and I had my runner beans out. So I used this, and it kept the cold off. None of the runner beans were harmed in the cold, so I find it really useful. And it's also really good just in general to get the temperature up in the area a slightly bit more, keeps a bit of the wind off, and it can really boost plant health. So for example, over in the other part of my garden, I've actually got my garlic, I've got a bit of a dome of Enviromesh over it, and they're growing better than the ones that are outside. So it really is a great product, but don't feel like you have to buy something like this, because you really don't. There's so many other options out there that you have lying around your shed or your house that you don't know about. So the next thing that you can cover your plants with is fleece, and this is the closest thing I've got to it, which is basically a liner that goes underneath pond liner. But I use this overnight because it's dark and it blocks a lot of the light out. But fleece is lighter and you can leave it on all day, and you can get it in 17 gram per square metre, which goes down to, I think it was about -2 or -5 or something, or you can get 34 gram, which is much more robust for going against lower frosts. And I don't actually have any frosts, which is why I had to show you this. But I don't actually have any fleece, which is why I had to show you this pond liner. But fleece, everyone swears by it, but the one thing that I have heard is that it's not very long lasting. It only lasts a few years and then it starts to rip and things like that. So maybe try and go for Enviromesh, but if you get really cold temperatures, there may be 34 gram fleece, and if it's really cold you can even fold that over and double it up. And even if you've got plants in an unheated greenhouse, like that one, or like in my harvester here, then you could still use fleece in there when it's getting really cold, because I find my greenhouses do freeze inside when it's particularly cold. So that's why I protect plants that are in my greenhouse, if you're getting confused as well, because I do get some frost inside, especially when it gets well below freezing. So I think I do quite like to protect my plants that are in there. And the other thing in greenhouses is that if you do want to protect your plants that are in there, then putting them as far away from the windows as possible is as good as well. So putting them right in the middle of the greenhouse, and that should stop a lot of frost as well. But fleece is something I'm looking to invest in, because I'm fed up of having to find things to cover plants with. I just want something easy that I can get out of the shed, put on the plants. But all the home remedies are still, or home methods are still really, really good, and that's still what I use to this day. But fleece, I think, would be a lot more useful. So the next one is cloches, or sort of plastic things like this that cover them. So as you know, I've got a big cloche down on my bed down there, but this is simply something that's from a heated propagator tray, and I put these over module trays, or the trays that are actually from the heated propagator, and these are really good at keeping the frost off. They've got a little vent so that when it does get warm you can open the vent and let them cool off, or otherwise you can just leave them like this. And you can get these without a heated propagator as well. And they're really good because even inside a greenhouse, rather than putting fleece in the greenhouse, like I just mentioned, you can just use these on top of your trays and they'll keep your plants all nice and toasty and warm. And they're also really good as well for getting a head start on the season with plants that don't like the cold. So you can just put these on top and they'll grow. Another great way of protecting your plants from frost and saving things from going to the bin is to use old bedding sheets or clothes over the top of your plants. And obviously woolly clothes will be really good at this, but things such as mattress covers or mattress sheets or whatever you want to call them, they could work really well because if you think about it, they're very similar to fleece. So you can use them just over the top of your plants and that'll keep your plants nice and warm. Speaking about warm, the wind is really chilly today. And you can also use bubble wrap, which is really good because it's left over from parcel. So you can use this over the top of your plants and that'll keep the heat in and also stop any frost getting to them, because the air in the bubbles, air is one of the best insulators as we all know. So that's why it's really good to keep bubble wrap from parcels and use it to protect your plants. And last but not least is compost bags. And this is new for me, I've only recently started doing this, but I thought I've got so many old compost bags that are empty. I don't really like chucking them away because they're plastic and I always think that I could use them for something. And I could just put them over plants, even if it's just overnight, because if the foliage is on there, these obviously block out all of the light. So you don't want to put it on plants that have got a lot of foliage for the daytime. But just overnight to keep the overnight frost off is really a good way of doing it. Or at the moment I'm just keeping these on top of my dahlia tubers that I've potted up. I'm keeping them on all of the time because these will essentially just stop all the frost getting to dahlias. And as we all know, dahlias, especially their first shoots, are really, really tender and not very good for frost. But anyway, that was the last of all the options that I thought of. Let me know if you can think of any down below, and the best other one that you comment, I'll pin the comment to the top of my comment section. But that's all I have for today, so thank you for watching. Make sure you go down below, hit the subscribe button, like the video, and leave a comment if you have any other ideas. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.